Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce Anthony Williams, who, as you know, is your program chair. And he's about to unveil something called the Digital Social Action Plan. And this is something that he and a number of other people have been working on over the past period. And while Anthony is in the room, I will repeat what I said before, that I think the program at this event is certainly the richest program from a content point of view of the four World Congresses that I've attended. Anthony is an extraordinary young man. I'm very proud to say that he's a collaborator of mine. He is the author of two best-selling books, one of them being Wikinomics, a co-author of Wikinomics with me. And that was a big book, was the best-selling management book for the whole year in the United States. And he's currently working on a new book by himself on what he calls micro multinationals. These are tiny little companies that are multinational, powerful organizations, again, enabled by the internet. Anthony's got a group of interesting people to introduce to you. So when I say please welcome Anthony, I'd like you to give him a really good round of applause, not just for chairing this next session, but also for his fabulous work as the program director for this 18th World Congress. Please welcome Anthony D. Williams.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you've been enjoying today's program and the program over the past couple of days as much as I have. We've seen a lot of fabulous speakers, had many great panel discussions, I think a lot of very intriguing content. What we're about to do this afternoon is something that's done every time there is a WCIT event, a World Congress. They release a declaration. And the declaration is a statement of policy intent. It helps sum up some of the big ideas, some of the directions we would like to see leaders in business and government take as they move forward. But what I want to describe first, before we get to actually announcing the declaration, is the process that we undertook to get there. And I think it's truly unique in the whole history of World Congresses. To my knowledge, has never been done before. We decided that, a traditional conference is great. You come, you hear speakers, you meet people, then you go home and you get back to business. What we realized is that we may be able to, involve 1,000, 2,000 people over the course of 3 days. But there's a huge community externally, not in the room here, engaged in all of the many issues that we've been talking about, the future of healthcare, education, government, financial services. And we wanted to set up a process to tap into that community, that broader array of individuals, organizations, government agencies, that are deeply invested in these topics, and see if we could have a global conversation that would involve them in helping to set these policy priorities. Now, you could argue that maybe up until about 5-10 years ago, that kind of global, real-time conversation with tens of thousands of individuals would have been truly impossible. But we think today, because of a couple of changes, that it was possible, and indeed we proved it was, thanks to a partnership with IBM. Now, the first, as you know, you've been hearing about this from many of our speakers over the past couple of days, is that we have a truly global platform today for computation and collaboration. We have growing access. We have not, by any means, solved the digital divide. And in fact, our declaration today will be addressing the need to continue to make gains in improving infrastructure and access around the world. But we do know that, today, because of mobile phones, that something like 90% of the populations in China, India, South Africa have access to the web. I was involved in a research project looking at the future of electricity in African countries a couple of years ago. Discovered that 97% of Tanzanians had reported that they could access a mobile phone. Not all of them owned one, but they could go to telecottages and get access to a mobile phone where they could perhaps exchange text messages with relatives or look up crop prices on commodity exchanges. So we have the platform to reach a lot of people. That's clear. We also have tools that allow for really deep engagement with audiences so that we can we can actually have meaningful conversations. We can collect data. We can do visualizations. We can run it with analytics. So all of that infrastructure exists. And the second is that we have these global communities that have formed. I mean, if anything, the internet has started to reshape the very nature of human community itself. For the first time, we can organize around any conceivable interest, shared goal, or objective in a heartbeat. And you can have social movements without leaders. You can have communities without physical locations. And that is what we have seen. We've seen people organizing around the future of energy, education, and healthcare across borders, coming together across organizations and talking about these issues in new ways. And that was something we wanted to tap into. And the third, and this is something that my co-author Don and I have spent a lot of time talking about, is that there is a sense, I think, globally today in many different countries and organizations that there is a deep need for institutional redesign. And it doesn't really matter which institution you look at, whether it's a government, the fact that we have declining voter turnouts, we have less youth engagement, for instance, we have escalating deficits that have put the budgets in many different national countries in deep jeopardy. Or whether you're looking at the energy system, which still predominantly runs off dirty fossil fuels, that contribute to climate change. Or a healthcare system, again, which is dealing with escalating costs and an aging population. So virtually, everything is in need of some innovation. And we felt that this was an opportunity to get people involved in proposing real solutions. So what we did is as I said, we set up a partnership with IBM. Now, IBM has something called a JAM platform. And the JAM platform means that thousands of people can realistically come together simultaneously online and have meaningful conversations about public policy issues. And we went out and tried to find the smartest people around the world on a number of these topics I've mentioned. We organized them into communities. We set up dozens and dozens of moderators across the different communities so that when we invited the global population to get involved, that they would have people that could help facilitate discussion. And we agreed that those discussions would provide a really important input into the actual planning of the agenda here. So what you see today and have seen over the past couple of days is a direct result of what we heard from the global population that got involved. Now, what did we see in terms of participation? About 11,000 people globally in 84 different countries. We were very impressed with the extent of the population that got engaged. You can see here the list of countries where we had the top participants, but collectively 84 different countries across the world had people represented in the JAM. We made a very special effort to get young people involved. We know that young people today are leading some of the most dynamic and innovative organizations, projects, and enterprises that we have seen, so we wanted to tap into that energy. We know that young people are early and eager adopters of technology, digital natives, as people often say. And as a result of that, we knew that probably some of the boldest, bravest, most dynamic ideas would come from young populations. And so what we did in that regard is we built a partnership with the Canadian Coalition for Tomorrow's ITC Skills. You heard from David Tickall, who's the chairman of that organization. He was up here yesterday morning moderating the panel. And the team there at Career Mash organized something called the Youth Tech Jam. So we had the 11,000 as part of the IBM World Tech Jam. We had another 10,000 young people across Canada engaged in this conversation too. 1,000 of them actually in person. We had a team go around to high schools in 6 different cities, asking young people what they thought about an increasingly digital future. How does it change the world as they see it? What do they expect from an increasingly digital world? What are the challenges and opportunities? What does it mean for them as they think about their careers? And again, we had hundreds of ideas generated through that process, and we put that together with the JAM. We got very powerful outputs. You can see here, this was done by IBM. It's a snapshot of the very rich networks that were formed as a result of these conversations that happened back in June, earlier this year. And here's a look at just the vast array of ideas that were proposed or the topics that people were discussing. Now let me review quickly before we get into the declaration. And in fact, I'm going to introduce you to a very special young woman who was the winner of the Career Math Youth Tech Jam, or one of two winners, in fact. She was selected by her peers as one of the most articulate and energetic and imaginative contributors to the process. Before I bring her on stage, though, let's just get a sense of what people were discussing. And I don't think it will be a surprise to you, because many of these ideas have come up over the past couple of days. We've seen them time and again in the various panels. But I'll tell you that of the 11,000 people, when it comes to healthcare, a lot of people very passionate and enthused about personal health monitoring. The fact that today we have this vast array of sensors that can do everything from track your weight to your calorie intake to your glucose levels and your heart rate. And a lot of people are doing this on a daily basis. It's not quite mainstream yet, but a lot of people are taking very detailed personal health measurements. They're tracking how much they eat, how much they sleep, how much they exercise. And those kind of statistics allow us to be more informed about our own physical condition and be more proactive in being healthy. And in fact, when you look at the statistics, 50 to 60% of all of our health care dollars are spent on avoidable conditions that are largely linked to poor diet and poor exercise. So if people like these people online who are quite enthusiastic about this took up this routine of daily personal health measuring and monitoring, chances are we could help convince the broader population to be more healthy. So we heard a lot about that. We heard about enthusiasm for patient communities. Clay Shirky talked about this on the first day. It came up briefly during our panel on healthcare yesterday. This idea that if you have a rare condition, perhaps ALS or maybe a rare form of cancer like gallbladder cancer, you probably won't meet too many other people in your immediate neighborhood who share the same condition. But on the internet, there could be hundreds, even thousands of individuals who are going through exactly the same experience. Now, what recent medical studies suggest is that loneliness and isolation are bigger risk factors than smoking and alcohol consumption when it comes to coping with medical illnesses. That was something that surprised me, but the study said that a woman who has an active social network, who has breast cancer, has a 66% chance, a better chance of surviving than a woman who is alone and isolated in that process. The intuition behind it makes sense. You get emotional support, you get guidance, you can talk to others who have gone through a similar experience, you can talk about the regimen that your doctors have prescribed. There's all kinds of opportunities to increase the knowledge and the support available to an individual coping with a condition like that. And these online patient communities, like Patients Like Me, provide those kind of opportunities. Dawn talked about this idea yesterday at the end of the day. The idea that everyone, from the moment of birth, should have their own personal health record that tracks, every instance of their engagement with the healthcare system, that becomes an online vehicle where they can track, as I was saying earlier, all of their personal health measurements on a regular basis, and they can selectively choose of that data that is regularly collected what they want to share with their doctors or their insurers or healthcare providers. So that's a big opportunity. A lot of people very excited about that. And finally, in healthcare, we heard a little bit about the medical research side too. And Aled Edwards, who was on the panel this morning, talked about this, the need for a more open approach to medical research. The fact that up until this point, a lot of resources have been squandered where there could have been the sharing of intellectual property and resources that could have been accelerating medical research. So I won't repeat what he said, but only to say that that was a very popular idea during the World Tech Jam. Now, on the question of skills and education, we heard a number of important topics. David, again, was involved in this discussion. I think there was kind of two strands to this conversation. One of the threads of the conversation was, how do we convince young people to equip themselves with the skills and capabilities they need to be leaders in the jobs and industries of the future. And they talked about the vast array of different opportunities out there, the kind of industries that are emerging from green technology to new models of food production, to the advances in software computing and particularly cloud computing, and all of those those opportunities, and what are the new narratives we can tell people about that IT careers aren't just about being in the back office, but can be about using digital technologies to fundamentally redesign the way the world works, whether that's healthcare or education or other fields. So that was part of it. The second part was, and this is something we heard from the young people in particular, was the need to rethink the education, the approach to education, the models of pedagogy. In a world where the world's best lectures are available for free, we heard enthusiasm, and teachers talked about this, for a model of education called kind of flipping the classroom. I don't know if you've heard about this, but the idea of flipping the classroom is that, traditionally you have lectures in the class and you do homework at home. Well, the idea proposed by a lot of people was, why don't we view the lectures at home and do homework in the class? That was something that a lot of people considered to be a better use of time, because when you're doing the homework in the class, you could have opportunities for peer engagement and collaboration. The teacher could work directly with groups of students who may be experiencing difficulties or need more guidance. You could have a more customized approach in the classroom itself. And not to mention the fact that you could probably access a lot of digital tools more effectively in that environment as compared to one where the teacher spends all of the time providing a lecture. So we heard quite a bit about that. In the topic of energy, people ask for better and simpler ways to monitor their energy consumption. They said that the current information they get from their utilities is inadequate, and the tools that they have in the home are inadequate too. So there seems to be a big pent-up global demand for smart energy grids and smart energy services in the home. And these tools and services are being developed all over the world, many different innovative applications. The question is, why are utilities and governments slow in putting them into action? And I know there's issues there, but clearly the demand exists. Now, in the last topic that I'll address this afternoon before inviting Nahir Patel to the stage is smart cities. We heard about that too as well yesterday. And Carlo Ratti was here from MIT, and he described an experiment where they are doing real-time mapping of urban systems and the flow of people, and trying to understand, for instance, whether the urban infrastructure and transportation systems are actually optimized for the real flow of people through the city. They did a particularly interesting experiment where they tracked the movement of individuals across the city of Rome over a 24-hour period, and they did that using cell phone signals. And then they started to ask important questions. Being able to see how people move throughout the city over a 24-hour period, you can ask questions, well, are the buses actually optimized in such a way that they're going to where the people are at the right time of day? And could we use that intelligence that we've gathered about the movement of people across the city to better inform how we do our urban planning or route our transportation networks? That's just one simple idea that was proposed. That, if Rome can do that, why can't every other city in the world pursue a similar approach? We heard about new transportation innovations, something that came up on a regular basis in the discussion. It was discussed largely by Robin Chase yesterday, and she talked about the need to maximize our shared resources and our infrastructure, optimize it in a way that improves efficiency. Ride sharing is clearly part of that. Increased support for telecommuting, working from home, for smart hubs where people can work closer to their actual residences. These were all ideas that were discussed extensively. And by the way, a lot of the ideas and data that I'm talking about here is going to be available to you too, so that you can refer back to this conversation and use it as a point of reference. And I just want to point to one particular example that I found very interesting that came up in the course of the jam, and I hadn't heard of this one before, but I like it as an example, so I'm going to share it with you. A group of researchers at Berkeley University very interested in tracking air quality. What they found is that in most cities you get an aggregate reading of air quality, but in actual fact, cities are very large, and the concentration of industry can be quite different from one part of the city to the others. So their hypothesis was that air quality is actually quite local. And it's not just, it could be that certain neighborhoods have much poorer air quality than others. And we needed to know that, because that's that actually has very meaningful implications for the people that live in those neighborhoods. So what they did is they came up with sensors that can monitor air pollution particulates at a very fine granular level. And in fact, even I learned that Nokia has a phone called the Eco Sensor phone that has chips embedded in the phone that can actually do this air quality monitoring too. But their experiment was based in San Francisco, and they took these air quality sensors, and they figured out that the street sweepers are probably the one reliable vehicles that actually drive around the entire city all day long. And if they equipped these air quality sensors to the street sweepers, they could actually get very granular readings of air quality across entire neighborhoods. They also decided that they could begin to station these air quality sensors, all around the city as well. And here's what they found. You can see the green spots there were particular problem areas in the city where the concentration of air pollutants was very high. So then they developed a text-based service, because this happens on a real-time basis now, this monitoring, so that if somebody has asthma and they go into a neighborhood that may have a high density of air pollutants, they actually get a text message warning them to go inside or put on a mask. So these are the kind of dynamic services and the ideas that were generated as part of the jam. And I think I'm going to skip that because I want to make sure we have enough time to get Nahir on the stage. But the point I want to make is that this, to me, illustrates in many ways the power of mass collaboration in these kind of circumstances. The fact that we spend a lot of time emphasizing the need to collaborate better in our departments. And if we're really effective and good about it, sometimes we get very rich collaboration happening inside an entire enterprise. But the real opportunity here is to go beyond the enterprise, to tap into the knowledge and ingenuity in our broader ecosystems and indeed the world, because the tools exist to do that now. And the meaningful input you can get as a result, to me, it truly validates the power of this exercise. Now, as I said, I want to invite, at this point, the young woman who was selected by her peers as the winner of the Youth Tech Jam. And we're going to have a little brief conversation. Nahir Patel, please come on stage and join me. And please give her a round of applause. So welcome to the World Congress, Nahir. I know you've been here for the past couple of days. Nahir gave me a very moving card, quite frankly, just earlier, and said that how much the experience of being at the Congress had changed her perspective on digital technologies, enriched her life. And so that was very meaningful and very kind of you to do that. I wondered if you've been here now for a couple of days, and maybe you could share with the audience some of the things that have impressed you most, things that you've learned and that you'll take away as when you go back to, by the way, Nahir studies at York University in Toronto. When you go back to York University, what sort of lessons will you take back with you?
First off, I'd just like to say bonjour and hello to everyone. I'd like to thank the WCIT for welcoming me to the conference, and also for the organization of Career Mesh for putting this extraordinary effort just to put me, like a youth, in the place of this business gathering. So thank you so much for that. I also understand that it might be a little hard to understand what I'm saying, but I'd like to just ask the audience to, instead of listening with their eyes, to see with their ears just this time. So to answer your question, you asked what excited me about the conference. And to be honest, I can't believe all the initiatives that are going on with so many different countries. Like, there's an example of accessibility in places like Nigeria, where there are people who are getting access to mobile applications and the internet that would help them access care, information, support. And there are initiatives like this that are really helping change the world. There's also the aspect of equality, where if you're connected to the internet, you're on the same playing field as anyone else connected to the internet. For example, if I'm connected in Canada, that's not going to make a substantial difference if I'm connected in Nigeria, or if there's my colleague or my peer connected in Japan. So I really like how organizations today are emphasizing accessibility and equality among people connected to mobile devices and other resources as well.
Now, Nahir, you were involved in conversations with many different young people about digital technologies, the way that they're shaping the future. Are there things that concern you about an increasingly digital future?
Well, to be honest, people think that youth don't think about this at all, but privacy is actually the #1 issue that I think about. Where if you take, for example, things like Facebook, where people think youth aren't going to care like who sees what, but to be honest, we actually do. Like we do Google searches of ourselves. We do ask people, do you see this part of my application? Some people even have different profiles just to check what you can see on your profile. So as well, I just think that like with privacy, I'm concerned about what's happening with like there seems to be a rat race of information of who has the most data available to them, and it seems that we're kind of as a collective group, we're not paying attention to the politeness of asking if you could have information, or keeping in mind that some people might not like I might not want my pictures online, but other people might be okay with it. So I think we need to keep in mind with privacy. And the second issue that I wanted to point out was also we seem to be losing our basic skills. For example, I'm just going to ask as a question to you all. How many of you could look outside and without having a watch or a clock or anything, know what time of the day it is? Like exact time, like what hour it is? Yeah, so this is what I mean, where like a basic skill, like learning to know time on the web, learning to know time in the sky, most of us can't even do it. Like I myself can't even do that. So like if knowing directions and things like that, like north, south, east, west, if we can't have these basic skills, I'm struggling to see how we will go into the future and our future citizens, how they will be able to work past those basic skills.
So with the privacy question, let's just go back to that for one second. I mean, is there something that you would like to see companies like Facebook or Google do differently to help better protect your privacy or give you more options?
I liked one of the suggestions that was mentioned by a speaker I apologize, whose name I can't remember, but they suggested that that agencies, that governments, that different corporations tell users what they're doing with that information that they're using, what they're collecting and what they're doing with it. So for example, say they're collecting the ages of all the users on a certain website. What is this age going to factor into? Like, what is it going to change? Is it actually needed to be collected? So that's the kinds of things that I want, that I would like, and other people as well would like companies to have, to show at least what's going on in the back scene.
Now, I know you're studying English and French at York University at the moment. Are you yourself thinking of a career in an IT-related field at all?
Well, to be honest, my school, I totally love it because they actually specialize in, it's called a specialist high skills major. So it's short for SHISM. And they specialize in ICT skills. So I got to know organizations very well, like Career Match. We've been to the National Film Board of Canada. We've watched the Remix Manifesto movie, documentary. So all these things, we've seen the back scenes of like different production stages, and it's really helped me gain an awareness of technology. So it's almost like something I like to know about. I like to know technology and see the ways it's changing. And as a future teacher, I'd like to know how it's going to affect the people who I will teach and how that's going to affect the people they will be around. So I like to know just as a point of informing the future citizens of the world.
And as someone who wants to go into teaching, I mean, what do you think about the proposals for flipping the classroom? Are there other things you'd like to see teachers do differently, given that today's students are immersed in digital technologies?
To point out, I think that nowadays kids are more, it's like a repetitive thing. When you ask a child, if you any of you know a child in your area or a relative, if you ask them what's school like, they say it's boring. Well, then you ask them, why is it boring? Oh, it's the same thing over and over again. Go to class, do your homework, and that's it. But I think if we make classes more interactive, like say, for example, in university, I know the topic of having lectures is repetitive. It gets boring. So I think where you have places where it's more like a shared kind of classroom where the professor is not just treating you as if they're, overboarding, like, oh, I'm the one you're supposed to be listening to. It's more like, let's work together on fixing this problem, or let's have a more interactive session. So I think that will really be key. And instead of making a student feel like they're just getting information like whacked at them, instead of having a more collaborative sense of education.
So last question, over the course of the past 3 days, we've had a lot of senior leaders in business and government here. Are there any, recommendations that you would like to share with them, if we want to work towards securing a bright future for young people such as yourself?
I think what people need to do nowadays is to show and not tell. Because if we just describe things to people, to students, they won't really get it. Where, for example, today, a few weeks ago, I think, Google unveiled their data centers where you could see how their information is actually, going and where it's going and everything. To like organizations having co-op students come in, or having like a youth, bring a youth to work day or something like that. I think that will help, instead of just saying like, oh, this is what my work day is like, having an actual like showing of it. And as well, I think if people would give initiative to youth to trust us, that's what we're asking you to do, because nowadays, as we know, it's hard to get a job. But if you just give that initiative to us, like contests like this, Career Match, I totally recommend contests because they make you want to go out into these things. And if there's any investment that you're going to make in the world, the best investment is putting it into the future generations of the world, because that investment is going to be priceless. And I can guarantee you for that. I'm a living example of that.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think you can clearly see why Nahir was selected by her peers as one of the most articulate and imaginative young people who participated in the Congress and at the Youth Tech Jam. So one more round of applause from Nahir. Thanks so much for joining us. Okay. Now, just before we close this session, I want to invite John Higgins to the stage. Now, John is the Director General of Digital Europe, which is like ITAC here in Canada. It's an industry association for technology companies in Europe. John is also the chair of the Policy Action Committee at WCIT and has been playing an instrumental role in crafting the Montreal Declaration and working on WCIT's policy initiatives. So, John, come on onto the stage, and thanks for joining us. Okay.
It's a small world, ladies and gentlemen. It's a small world. I realise that Anthony works part of his time for the Lisbon Council in Brussels, and I heard Anne Metier, who's the chief executive of the Lisbon Council, give a talk about this micro multinationals that I think Don introduced at the beginning, and so it's great to be doing some work here in Canada with him. Now, that was a very kind introduction. Let me take a few minutes of your time to do two things. I want to land a message with you that it's really important that our industry, the ICT and digital technology industries, influence public policy consistently at a national level, also at a regional level. I would say that, wouldn't I, coming from Europe? So it's important that we do it at regional groupings, like in Europe. but that we also do it at a global level, at a sort of a multinational level too. The second thing I want to do is I want you to join me and feel part of the Montreal Declaration. Join me in the sort of virtual signing of it, which is what we'll do. So we'll do those two things. I'll take a few moments to talk you through some of the policy work that we're doing, and then we'll get you up to here with us virtually to sign this Montreal Declaration. First, let me just recap on WCIT. I mean, it is worth dwelling on for a moment, because it's the association of associations from 84 countries around the world, from Canada, here with our friends in ITAC, to Cambodia, from Malaysia to Mexico. And it's a fantastic intellectual capability that those associations are able to bring to the party. And we really all benefit from that. Now, at the beginning of this conference, I don't know if you remember, it was almost Don's first words were, it's a broken place. The world's a broken place. And then we've spent the rest of the conference pretty much looking at how digital technology has been setting out to fix that broken place. And it's been a pretty impressive story. Now, I've heard, I don't know if you've heard too, but I've heard repeatedly the importance of public policy throughout that debate. You know, it's been woven into it. If you remember Wim Elfrink yesterday, he referred to it as smart regulation. You know, it's an important part of the answer. What we heard and what we strongly support is that good public policy accelerates our ability to fulfill the promise of the digital age, and poor public policy impedes, if not stops, our ability to do that. Now, these aren't just sweeping assertions, as it were, on WCIT's part. We've actually done quite a lot over the years of detailed work looking at specific policy actions that will deliver the promise of the digital age. And in fact, quite a lot of that work was contained in a brochure that we produced with that very title only a year or so ago. And that document contains a number of blueprints in specific areas. I just wanted to mention a couple of those. One is about the issue of what we might have referred to in this conference as cybersecurity. We called it in our document protecting your information assets and protecting your information infrastructure. And what we were able to do was draw on our 84 members' experience in this area and look at best practice and set this out in a blueprint for what any modern economy ought to be doing to protect its information assets and its information infrastructure. And of course, one of the key findings, one of the things in this blueprint, was to have a very close working relationship between the public and the private sector on this matter, not least because many of the members in our associations these days run large parts of the infrastructure on which our information assets sit. So a close working relationship. So just one example of where the 84 members came together and produced a really good policy blueprint, which, if we followed it, would help us deliver the promise of the digital age that much more quickly. Another one, important to all of us in associations, is a blueprint for encouraging a thriving tech industry. And a number of panels have dealt today, and indeed over the last 3 days, with some of the underlying issues about developing a thriving tech industry. And that's important. We've looked a lot in this conference, and quite rightly too, about the benefits that tech brings to society and economy. But there was a very good piece of work done by the Economist Intelligence Unit some time ago that made a very direct link between the strength of the digital technology industry in a country and that country's ability to take advantage of those technologies. And if you think about it, that sort of makes sense. But it's really important that you, as well as looking at how to exploit and use digital technologies, you also look at the policies that you need in order to have a strong digital technology industry in your country. And that's what our blueprint does. That's the second area we looked at. Another piece of work we released, in fact, only yesterday, was looking at internet governance. You might think a rather dry subject, but there are things going on at the moment that really affect the way that the internet might be governed. And one particular move is about to unfold at a conference in Dubai, also interestingly called the WCIT, stands for something else. It's a telecoms conference run by the International Telecoms Union in Dubai, where they will be looking at extending something called international telecoms regulations to cover the internet. And we argue in our paper that's not really a good thing for the ITU to be doing. Rather, we would like them to concentrate their minds on those things that could give us better communications infrastructure that's available at a more reasonable price, and leave the governance of the internet to the already well-established institutions that are there. So that's a third piece of policy work. It can all seem a bit abstract, this stuff, can't it? So I thought I'd just try and make it real with a couple of examples. Down in Mexico, in Jalisco province, where the last public policy summit that WCIT held was carried out, the last policy summit about a year ago, we heard from Jalisco a presentation called The Power of Policy. And what they've achieved is to build a software industry in that province that's gone from almost nothing to $1.5 billion turnover today, simply by using good public policy, a really good example. Bringing it right back to this great event, we heard Mark Clifton yesterday from Dell talking about cloud computing. And if you remember, those of you who were in that session, he talked about the lengthy due diligence that Dell had to undertake before they established a data center in the UK. They had to look at the data protection regulations in all of the 27 member states of the European Union, an expensive and lengthy process that no doubt slowed down the opening of that data center. So maybe if the Jalisco example was good policy delivering benefits more quickly, there we have exactly the opposite. We had numerous examples from panelists talking about good policy, bad policy in relation to the communications infrastructure. There was one comment, I think I noted it absolutely precisely. He said, well, it's all down to access and pipes. And I think we heard comments like that many times. Now, you might think that this access to communications infrastructure is a bit of a, well, maybe it's a third world problem, and in the developed world it's okay. But did you know that 34% of European households don't have access to high-speed broadband? Or that there are 50 million people in the European Union who live in what are considered the grey areas. That's where the business model doesn't really encourage the rollout of communications infrastructure, but it's not so bad that state funding fixes it. There's this sort of grey area in between where the business model just doesn't quite add up. So I hope I've made the point that good public policy is absolutely critical to delivering the promise of the digital age, which is what this conference has been all about. Let me move, if I can, then to our declaration. Did I leave it backstage? Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. We actually have a declaration here, and it's the fourth in line of declarations from such conferences as this. Perfect. Thank you very much. It's the fourth in line at our policy conferences and at our WCITs. It's a nice tradition that we've now got going. And as you heard from Anthony, it draws not only on our policy work at all, but very much on the content of this three-day event. That's the model we want. We want to see what do we draw from this collective thinking that goes into our declaration, that moves the agenda on. And of course, this conference is built on the input, as you heard from Anthony, from 11,000 people who took part in the Tech Jam, as I did. So I won't expect you to read this. I know we've all been to conferences where people put up PowerPoints that are almost as illegible as this, haven't we? But I won't expect you to read it. But let me tell you the 4 things it covers. First of all, it applauds the accelerating pace of transformation on the problem solved, which is what we've been talking about throughout the conference, the opportunities created. And I think that's in terms of the new sorts of application areas that we've heard talks about. I think particularly brought it home to me the awards last night, the new areas that we've been focusing on. But also we've heard a lot about the new technologies like cloud. Purists would say it's not a new technology, but a packaging up. But nevertheless, you know what I mean. It's a new way of doing things. So the first thing the declaration does is applauds the continuing rapid, the astonishing pace of transformation to our lives, to our businesses, and to our public sector organizations that the digital technologies have enabled. Secondly, and you can see I've had a hand in it, secondly, it reminds us how important good public policy is to achieving those ends, and not something we can forget. The third thing it does is it commits WCIT members, including ITAC and our friends around the world, it commits us to continuing to work with stakeholders, with policymakers, and indeed in practical measures too. Many of us do practical projects that attempt to advance this technology. It commits us to continuing to do that, to drive ever faster the pace of the transformation that this technology enables. And finally, it draws out this one thing. It draws out the one thing that members tell us, I've just mentioned it as well, that we have to have reasonably priced access to high-speed communications, because our members tell us it just underpins everything. It's not the thing itself, but it underpins everything. And if you don't have it, well, a lot of the rest of the stuff is, well, frankly, you can't do it. So I hope I have persuaded you of the importance of good public policy. Maybe some of you I didn't need to persuade, I just needed to remind. And I also hope that I've won your support for our Montreal Declaration. And if I have, and I'm going to, unless you all get up and scream, no, 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 I'm going to invite colleagues on the stage to co-sign this declaration with me. So first of all, I think, Anthony, come back and we'll sign it to start with. And then I've known that there's a host of other people. I actually do have a pen. I do have a pen. I do. I think it's that one. Thank you. So, do you want to invite some other people up to the stage? Kana, I think you're coming. We've got our friends from ITAC, Francois, Jim Poissant, the Secretary General, Witzer, Francois. Photo opportunity.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll close this session, and I think we'll take a quick break now, and we'll be back in a few moments.